Thank you, Swamiji, and namaskar to all. I'm very happy to be here with the esteemed institution and with the Swamijis and scholars and all others who are present. I wish I could be there with you in person, but it's second best to be here in France and to be able to speak to you from here. So my topic this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, even here this afternoon. My topic this afternoon is Swami Vivekananda's thoughts on prana and pranayama. And that's a very important and a large topic in Swami Vivekananda's thought. It was the topic I'm going to divide into two parts that are closely related, prana and pranayama. I first speak about the topic of prana in general, and then tie it to the practice of pranayama, which the Swami also taught. So Swami Vivekananda was interested in prana and spoke a great deal about prana because he related it, he was trying to relate the ideas of Vedanta and Sankhya cosmology to modern science, the modern science of his day. And it was a topic which was very interesting to the Swami, and he thought very important for the modern world, that we be able to relate our thought to modern scientific thought, which had such a sway over the modern mind. Such a sway that in the Western world, at least, philosophy itself became almost a servant of modern science. It's still taught as an independent discipline, but really modern philosophy in the West has become the handmaiden of modern science. And so Swamiji realized the importance of modern science. He realized how it was taking over world thought, or at least taking a dominant place in world thought. And so he wanted to relate Vedantic cosmology to modern science. And he felt that Vedantic cosmology stood on a very firm ground. Because of the many advances in modern science in the 20th century, the Swami might have spoken somewhat differently today. And that's natural because the discoveries of science in the late 19th century were tremendously amplified by the discoveries in the 20th century, from the time of Einstein in 1906 with his first paper on relativity on to the present day. But the Swami's thought on cosmology and how he related it to modern science was based on the ancient traditions of Vedanta and of Sankhya, but also based on his spiritual experience and what he had learned from Sri Ramakrishna. So because it was not just a reflection of modern scientific thought and some intellectual development of the modern scientific thought of his day, his thoughts have lasting value. That is, he related our cosmology to the science of his day, and the science of his day has changed. The science of today is much advanced over the science of his day, but his thoughts were, or what he did was to relate principles, experiential principles, to the science of his day. And so that continues. So his approach was based on spiritual experience, and so the essence of what he said is sound. It's up to us to modify the expression as time goes on, to relate the ancient cosmology to modern science, but the essence of what Swamiji did continues. And to speak about Swami Vivekananda's ideas on prana is to speak about his ideas on akasha as well. Modern science is focused on matter and energy. The nature of the material world, which has been studied extensively by chemistry, biology, but principally chemistry, and by physics, and then the nature of the forces of nature on energy. And so Swami Vivekananda spoke a great deal about the interplay between Akasha and prana. And Nikola Tesla, the great scientist who specialized in electricity, he was considered a wizard, the modern wizard of electricity. He knew the Swami, heard the Swami speak, and for the rest of Tesla's life, he spoke about prana and akasha. So he took those ideas to the end of his life. Swamiji gave a large number of classes and lectures dealing directly with prana, both in his book on Raja Yoga, the first half of which consists of lectures he gave on, or classes he gave on Raja Yoga. There he has a lecture entitled the Prana, and a second lecture entitled The Psychic Prana. And he also gave a great deal of attention to prana in his cosmology lectures in Jnana Yoga. And then in England, he gave lectures on cosmology as well as his New York Jnana Yoga lectures. So again, we see a great deal of attention given to both prana and akasha. But there we come to our first problem. It's not really a problem, but it's an apparent problem. It's a linguistic problem. And that is that, as most people will know, modern science claims to have disproven ether, the existence of an ether through which light waves are propagated. Various experiments have tried to show the existence of an ether, and Einstein and others showed that ether was an unnecessary theory and there was no experimental evidence for ether. And yet, Swami Vivekananda translated oftentimes akasha as ether. But the scientific idea of ether that was disproven by Einstein and others was not the basis of the Hindu idea of akasha. And so, yes, they may have disproven the existence of ether as conceived by science of the 19th century, but they didn't disprove the Hindu conception of ether, which is quite different, as we will see. Now, let me say in full disclosure that I am not a scientist. I make no claims of being a scientist. And so I cannot speak from the scientific standpoint, except for the popularized ideas, which many of us have come to know. But it's not necessary to be a scientist to speak about Swami Vivekananda's ideas on prana and akasha, because they were founded on philosophical principles. They were not tied to scientific experiment, but were based on the perceptions of the ancient sages and of the Swami himself. And so it's from that standpoint that I will speak, from a more scientific, from a more philosophical rather than scientific standpoint. So the akasha which Vedanta and Sankhya speak about, the akasha as found in the Upanishads, in the Vedanta tradition as well as in the Sankhya tradition, and the akasha which Swami Vivekananda spoke about, is that out of which everything here in the visible universe has come. The visible universe and even the mental universe. There's the statement in Taittiriya Upanishad, same statement in various Upanishads, but the Taittiriya says, Akashad vayuhu vayur agnihi agner apaha adbhya prithivi prithivya oshadhayaha. So out of Akasha came Vayu, out of Vayu came Agni, out of Agni came the waters, out of the waters came the earth, and out of all of these came the plants and human life and everything else. That sounds like ancient, superstitious, non-scientific thought. But actually, as Swamiji showed, and as we can see from our own analysis, the division into the five elements was not primitive nonsense or the primitive ravings of primitive minds, But it was based on a completely different analysis of nature from the modern scientific analysis. Modern science looked at the external world, external nature, and said, what is all of this made out of? And they came up with the periodic table of chemical elements, out of which everything here has come, starting with hydrogen and then helium, and on up into the man-made elements at the far end of the chart. The radioactive elements, beyond the natural radioactive elements. So that was the way that modern science analyzed the universe. The Vedic sages didn't analyze in that way. They didn't have chemical laboratories and try to take apart examples of physical matter, but they saw that we have 5 senses, 5 ways of knowing the external world, and only 5. There are only 5 ways of knowing the external world: through sight, through sound, through smell, through taste, and through touch. And so the 5 elements relate to the 5 ways that we experience the world. We hear all kinds of sounds with the ear, but all of the things that we hear are sounds, nothing but sounds. We see all sorts of things with the eyes, all sorts of objects. But what do we see with the eyes? Nothing but light. And the brain interprets different wavelengths of light into different colors. But we don't see anything but light and the absence of light. We smell all kinds of odors, but they're all variations of odor. We taste all kinds of tastes, but they're all variations of the sense of taste. We touch all kinds of textures, etc., but all of them are the experience of pressure and variations of pressure. So we have 5 ways of experiencing the world, and the 5 elements were those. So again, coming back to Akasha, Akasha was considered to be the basis of material creation. So that Akasha of the ancient sages is not 19th century ether. So perhaps the 19th century scientific ether is dead, but it's too early at least to declare the Akasha as dead. So it's best now, I think, instead of translating Akasha as ether, which immediately brings up the idea of, well, they haven't progressed beyond 19th century science, it's best to translate ether as space, because Akasha is said to be that which makes extension into space possible. It's ether which makes extension in space possible. So Swami Vivekananda said that the universe is an interplay between prana and Akasha. So I want to read a passage from Raja Yoga where Swamiji discusses this, and I'll stop a couple of times to comment on things that he says. So Swami Vivekananda says, according to the philosophers of India, the whole universe is composed of 2 materials, one of which they call Akasha. It is the omnipresent, all-penetrating existence. Everything that has form, everything that is the result of combination, is evolved out of this Akasha. It is the Akasha that becomes the air, Akashad Vayuhu, that becomes the liquids, Vayur, Agnir Apaha, that becomes the solids, Prithvi, etc. It is the Akasha that becomes the sun, the earth, the moon, the stars, the comets. It is the Akasha that becomes the human body, the animal body, the plants, every form that we see, everything that can be sensed, everything that exists. It cannot be perceived. It is so subtle that it is beyond all ordinary perception. It can only be seen when it has become gross, has taken form of all of the things that we experience in this world. So again, this is not 19th century scientific ether that he's talking about. One may still doubt whether this exists or not, but the absence of a modern acceptance of 19th century ether is not proof that it does not exist. So Swamiji continues, at the beginning of creation, there is only this Akasha, At the end of the cycle, the solids, the liquids, and the gases all melt into the Akasha again. And the next creation similarly proceeds out of this Akasha. So he goes on, by what power is Akasha manufactured into this universe? So again, he says that Akasha is the basic stuff out of which everything that is has been made, the basic material out of which this universe has come. So he asks, by what power is this Akasha manufactured into this universe? By the power of prana. Just as Akasha is the infinite, omnipresent material of this universe, so is this prana the infinite, omnipresent, manifesting power of this universe. At the beginning and the end of a cycle of creation, everything becomes Akasha, and all the forces that are in the universe resolve back into the prana. In the next cycle, out of this prana is evolved everything that we call energy, everything that we call force. It is the prana that is manifesting as motion. It is the prana that is manifesting as gravitation, as magnetism. And we could add here to what Swamiji says, it also is what manifests as the weak and the strong forces, the subatomic weak and strong forces. The weak force, which governs radioactive decay, and the strong force, which holds the nucleus together. Multiple protons of the same charge, it holds them together. So the four basic energies of nature, the force of gravitation, electromagnetism, the weak force, and the strong force. All of these are manifestations of prana. The weak and the strong force, of course, came to be known after Swamiji's time. It is the prana that is manifesting as the actions of the body, as the nerve currents, as thought force. And that's where we will come back to pranayama, where the prana is manifesting as thought force as well. From thought down to the lowest force, everything is but the manifestation of prana. The sum total of all forces in the universe, mental or physical, when resolved back to their original state, is called prana. When there was, and here he quotes the Nasadiya Sukta, when there was neither aught nor naught, when darkness was covering darkness, what existed then? That Akasha existed without motion, without any vibration. The physical motion of the prana was stopped, but it existed all the same, he goes on. So he continues, at the end of a cycle, the energies now displayed in the universe quiet down and become potential. At the beginning of the next cycle, they start up, strike upon the Akasha, and out of the Akasha evolve these various forms that we see. And as the Akasha changes, this prana changes also into all of these different manifestations of energy. The knowledge and control of this prana is really what is meant by pranayam. So there he ties the idea of prana to pranayama. But before coming to pranayama itself, I want to say some more about his ideas on prana and akasha. Swamiji, of course, believed in oneness at all levels of existence, which is the opposite of mainstream Buddhism. There were a couple of streams of Buddhism that went towards oneness, but generally Buddhism believed in multiplicity. In fact, I've had Buddhists get very angry in interreligious meetings when people on my side of the aisle kept talking about oneness. They say there is no oneness. That's the ultimate illusion, that there's any unity, that there's any oneness. But of course, Swamiji, being a Vedantin of experience, not just philosophy, believed that at all levels, behind variation, behind the infinite variety we see here, there's always an underlying unity. And so he believed that this unity exists at all levels. Akasha is one. Manifestations of Akasha are many. Prana is one. The manifestations of prana are many. As most of you know, Einstein worked for many of the last years of his life trying to find a unified field theory that would bring together the four basic forces of nature. Again, gravitation, electromagnetism, the weak force, the weak subatomic force, and the strong subatomic force. He tried to find one theory that would include all of these. Well, Vedanta it's not worked out scientifically and mathematically, but in principle, it's there. The idea of one prana, which has all of these manifestations. And so let me come to a couple of other short passages of Swamiji where he discusses this. He says, and this also is from Raja Yoga, in this universe, there is one continuous substance on every plane of existence. Physically, this universe is one. There is no difference between the sun and you. The scientist will tell you it is only a fiction to say the contrary. There is no real difference between the table and me. The table is one point in the mass of matter, and I another point. Each form represents, as it were, one whirlpool in the infinite ocean of matter, of which not one is constant. And so here at the level of Akasha, everything is one. There's one ocean of matter. And as the Swami would often say, my body is just a whirlpool in the ocean of matter. I'm continually taking in matter from the external world and giving off matter. This body, which seems to be so stable and so permanent, is an ever-changing whirlpool of matter. The pattern is stable, relatively stable. If it were completely stable, I wouldn't look as old as I do now. I would still look like the boy or the baby that was born. But it's relatively stable. But it's the pattern which is stable, and not the substance which is stable. And so there's a continuous ocean of matter. And like that, there's a continuous ocean of prana. And as the Swami also said in other talks, there's a continuous ocean of mind. So we have these different levels of unity, where all variety is an expression of an underlying unity. In fact, I'll just mention as an aside, one of the reasons for the scientific 19th century scientific explanation or theory of ether was to explain the apparent emptiness of much of material existence, that ether was that which filled in all of the gaps within our existence. And so that still holds in the Vedantic idea. It's just that, as Swami Vivekananda explains, ether is the source of all matter. So how can a physical material instrumentation, how can it detect the existence of that which is the source of itself? It can't. So that's where the idea of Akasha goes beyond the scientific, the old scientific idea of Akasha. But Akasha is that which makes this universe a continuity and not isolated electrical charges with vast amounts of void with nothing present. So another passage Swamiji says in Raja Yoga, matter is represented by the ether. When the action of prana is most subtle, this very ether in the finer state of vibration will represent the mind. And there it will still be one unbroken mass. I'll come back to that. If you can simply get to that subtle vibration, you will see and feel that the whole universe is composed of subtle vibrations. Sometimes certain drugs have the power to take us, while as yet in the senses, to that condition. Many of you may remember the celebrated experiment of Sir Humphrey Davy. This was, of course, back in the 19th century, late 19th century. When the laughing gas overpowered him, how during the lecture he remained motionless, stupefied, and after that he said that the whole universe was made up of ideas. For the time being, as it were, the gross vibrations had ceased, and only the subtle vibrations, which he called ideas, were present to him. He could only see the subtle vibrations round him. Everything had become thought. The whole universe was an ocean of thought. He and everyone else had become little thought whirlpools. So here we come to another idea, which I'll develop a little more in a moment, and that is the idea that this physical universe, prana and akasha, can be resolved into mind. That there are these layers of evolution. And at one level, we see this physical universe as a physical, tangible, real, objective universe. But through the development of mind, or, as Swamiji says, through taking certain drugs. That's not the recommended way. The Vedantic way and yogic way is through development of the mind. We come to a point where we actually see the world as a world of ideas. It no longer looks like a physical fact. That was something that was very strange when I first read this passage in Swamiji, this and a couple of other passages in Swamiji, where he talks about this, this idea that this universe is a universe of ideas at one level, not an idea of physical, a world of physical fact. So I thought, an idea, those are like, ideas are usually expressed in words. So do you see words instead of things? No, it doesn't mean that you see words instead of things. When one sees this world as a mental universe, one sees it like we see the world in dream. That is, in the dream, we take the dream world for granted. We take it as a real objective world. But when we wake up, we see that was all in my mind. It was a mental world created by my mind. The images were mental images. There was no physical fact there. And sometimes in the dream, we may wake up in the midst of the dream. We're still dreaming, but we become aware that I'm dreaming. And then we see that the whole dream world is a world of ideas. So in that sense, one can come through meditation, the development of meditation, to see this whole universe as a world of ideas. It no longer seems like a physical fact. So that's what Swamiji is talking about here, that everything is an ocean of matter, but at a higher level of vibration, it manifests as thought. So again, unity is the basis of every level of experience. Unity is unity itself is what is manifesting as a variety. Now, Swamiji also believed that Akasha and prana, matter and force, could be resolved into potential energy. So let me read a small passage from Swamiji on that. I don't usually give so many quotations, but I am speaking on Swamiji's ideas, and he expresses them so clearly that I have chosen to do that today. So he says in a letter to Mr. Sturdy in 1896, now both Akasha and prana, again, are produced from the cosmic Mahat, that is the cosmic mind, the universal mind, the Brahma or Ishvara. Mr. Tesla, here he's speaking to Nikola Tesla, whom he had met and spoken to. Mr. Tesla thinks he can demonstrate mathematically that force and matter are reducible to potential energy. I am to go and see him next week to get his new mathematical demonstration. Now, as we assume, scholars have assumed, Nikola Tesla was never able to do that. If he had, it would have changed the course of modern science greatly, because a few years later, Einstein came up with E equals mc squared, showing mathematically the relationship between matter and energy, that they are basically equivalent, that out of matter, one can get a huge amount of energy, because the mc squared, c squared is the speed of light squared, which is just to change the units of energy to make it an equivalent, just to change the units of matter to make them equivalent to the amount of energy produced. And so out of a little matter, one gets a huge amount of energy, as we know from nuclear experiments and nuclear explosions, nuclear energy, etc. So at this time, Nikola Tesla thought that he could prove that mathematically to Swamiji. Again, he didn't, but Einstein later did. No one knows whether Nikola Tesla would have pursued a different model, a different equation, a different mathematical proof. But it's very interesting that Swamiji saw that the two could be done. He told it to Tesla, and Tesla thought that he could prove it mathematically. That is, you have the duality of Akasha and prana. And Swamiji says that these two can be merged into potential energy. And that, as we know, is true. But again, Swamiji was insisted always on unity as the basis of all variety. And as he said, the search of knowledge is always the search for unity. And so Swamiji himself always followed that. He always sought the unitary principle that would explain all of variety. And so here he brought nature to Akasha and Prana, but he brought Akasha and Prana to a higher level of potential energy, which manifested as these two. So science was not there yet at the time of Swamiji, and Nikola Tesla could not bring it there, but later it did come there. So let me come to another passage of Swamiji's, which expresses how these Akasha and Prana merge into energy, which merges into mind. He says, on the Advaitic side, it is held that the soul neither comes nor goes. I should mention this is also from that same letter to Sturdy. On the Advaitic side, it is held that the soul neither comes nor goes. That is, there's neither birth nor death. And that all these spheres or layers of the universe are only so many varying products of Akasha and Prana. This world, Chandraloka, Surya Loka, Maharaloka, etc., are only so many varying products of Akasha and Prana. That is to say, the lowest or most condensed is the solar sphere, our sphere, consisting of the visible universe, in which Prana appears as physical force and Akasha as sensible matter. The next is called the lunar sphere, which surrounds the solar sphere. Now here, what Swamiji means by surrounds doesn't mean it's outside of this, but it is a higher level of vibration here itself, as he explains in other lectures. So the next is called the lunar sphere. This is not the moon at all, but the habitation of the gods. That is to say, Prana appears in it as psychic forces, and Akasha as tanmatras or fine particles. Beyond this is the electric sphere, that is to say, a condition in which Prana is almost inseparable from Akasha, and you can hardly tell whether electricity is force or matter. So this he's taking from the Upanishads, the idea of the departing soul goes through these different worlds of experience, as described in the Upanishads, Chandogya and others. Next is the Brahmaloka, where there is neither Prana nor Akasha. Both are merged in the mind stuff. So both Prana and Akasha are merged in the mind stuff, the primal energy, which is the primal energy, the mind stuff. And here, there being neither Prana nor Akasha, the Jiva contemplates the whole universe as samashti, or the total of Mahat, or mind. So, as most of you will know, the Mahat is the cosmic mind, Hiranyagarbha, Brahma, Prajapati, etc. But Mahat is a more impersonal expression of the impersonal principle that there is a cosmic mind. Just as there is the ocean of matter, this ocean of matter is a evolute of the cosmic mind. The cosmic mind is prior. Out of it comes the ocean of matter. And so just as my body is a whirlpool in the ocean of matter, so my mind, each individual mind, is a whirlpool in the ocean of matter. I mean, in the ocean of mind, sorry. The individual mind is a whirlpool in the ocean of mind, and that's how we can communicate with each other. That's how it's possible for some to read the thoughts of others, people like Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, who on occasion could, and whenever they wanted they could, but they didn't often do it, but they could read the thoughts of others, because there's no real separation. We, as Swamiji explains, are caught within the web of our own nervous system, and so we can't operate outside of our individual nerves. But one can get control of the mind in such a way that one no longer needs the network of nerves in order to operate. And so then we become cognizant, we become aware of the fact that there's one ocean of mind. And my mind is not limited to this network of nerves, but is a part of the ocean of mind. And it's, by the way, that ocean of mind with which Sri Ramakrishna was identified. He goes on, the jiva contemplates the whole universe as samashti, or the sum total of mahat, or mind, in Brahmaloka, the highest world. This appears as Purusha, an abstract universal soul, yet not the absolute. That is the supreme Purusha, where there is still multiplicity. From this, the jiva finds at last that unity which is the end. That is, from Brahmaloka, one realizes the absolute unity, the unity of Brahman beyond all manifestation. Advaitism, Swamiji goes on, says that these are the visions which rise in succession before the jiva, who himself neither goes nor comes, and that in the same way this present vision has been projected. And so this vision of the soul who has departed, where he goes to the lunar sphere, goes from the solar sphere to the lunar sphere, and the electric sphere, the sphere of lightning, etc. These are different worlds that the jiva experiences, but actually the soul, as Swamiji explains here and elsewhere, never goes anywhere. The soul is stable, and these are scenes that pass before us. As we're in a train, and a train passes our train, if our train has been stable and then suddenly a train passes us, we're not sure whether we're moving or the other train is moving. And so we are stable. We never go anywhere. The body, the mind, the body and the world around us move in relationship to each other. And we think that we, the soul, are moving. We, consciousness, are moving, but nothing ever moves. And so that's what he's talking about here, where these different worlds appear until one attains to the highest unity. But the main thing for today's discussion is to point out that here Swamiji is talking about the how the matter and energy, akasha and prana, resolve into the primal energy, which is the energy of pure mind. And so we have these two coming together in potential energy, and that emerging into mind, a higher unity. So now let me come to pranayama, because the Swami taught many classes, many lectures on pranayama. And as he finished one of the readings I gave, the knowledge and control of this prana is really what is meant by pranayama. So just as prana is the sum total of all energy, all the forces in the universe are expressions of this primordial energy prana, it's that prana which animates the body and mind. That's why in the Upanishads it said that wherever the prana goes, there the senses follow. And indeed, in our puja, when we, in the course of puja, when we establish Sri Ramakrishna in the heart through the jiva nyasa, first we invoke him, invoke the pranas of Ramakrishna, then we invoke the jiva of Sri Ramakrishna into our heart. Because where the pranas are, there the jiva remains and the senses remain. So we invoke first the prana, then the jiva of Sri Ramakrishna, then the sense organs of Sri Ramakrishna. Giving prime, the jiva, of course, is the most important, being consciousness itself, but the jiva manifests where the individual pranas have manifested. So we invoke first the pranas. So Swamiji gave great importance to pranayama. He gave a number of lectures on pranayama. And so I want to, the rest of the time I will speak about that. He gave simple breathing exercises. One breathing exercise was just breathing rhythmically. And that itself has great benefit. It helps to calm the mind, as we can see in our own experience. If we stop and just breathe slowly and rhythmically, we find that the body and mind become calm. So he taught that as an introductory type of breathing exercise. He also taught alternate breathing, breathing in through the left nostril, breathing out to the right, in through the right, out to the left, etc., back and forth, without kumbhaka, without holding the breath. Just nadi shodhana, as it's called, purification of the nadis, or the psychic channels of prana within the body. Just the alternate breathing. That is, Swamiji says, Shankaracharya says in his introduction, if it's by Shankaracharya, we won't go into that now, but the introduction to the Shvetashvatara Upanishad commentary attributed to Shankaracharya, the author speaks of doing this Nadi Shodhana pranayama and speaks of the great value of it. So even without kumbhaka, it's a very valuable exercise, and Swamiji taught that in classes to his followers. But he also taught more advanced practices of pranayama, what we might call real pranayama. That is, pranayama with kumbhaka, with holding the breath. As you know, there's rechaka, inhalation, there's puraka, inhalation, kumbhaka, holding the breath, and rechaka, getting rid of the breath, exhalation. These three processes which define pranayama proper. And so that he taught. One very simple form he taught was to breathe in deeply, exhale completely, and at the end of the exhalation, force all of the air out, and then hold the lungs empty as long as one comfortably can. And then to begin again, breathe in deeply, exhale completely, force all of the air out, and hold the lungs empty as long as one can. Again, no alternate breathing, just through both nostrils, breathing in, breathing out, holding the lungs empty. It's interesting that years ago, I saw a book on public speaking. And in that book, the person teaching public speaking said that for those who are nervous before they stand up to speak, and that includes almost everybody who has not become accustomed to speaking, for those who are nervous before they have to speak publicly, if you just take 3 deep breaths and force all of the air out of your lungs at the end of the exhalation, hold it out for a couple of seconds, and then breathe in again deeply, and then force all the air out, hold it out a couple of seconds. Do that 3 times, and you'll find that your nerves calm down, and you can go up to the podium, and you can speak with more self-possession. So that was one form of pranayama that Swamiji taught, which was very, very simple. And he said, just do that 4 times at the beginning of meditation. But he also taught other types of pranayama. He taught anuloma pranayama, where you breathe in a certain count, hold the breath, and breathe out a certain count. Breathe in, hold the breath, breathe out a certain count. So that type of pranayama he taught in a number of classes, telling people typically to start with a count of 4 breathing in, puraka, hold for 8, kumbhaka, breathe out for 4, rechaka, and then to slowly increase that with time. Go up to 6, 12, 6, 8, 16, 8, etc. And then he taught the more classic anuloma pranayama also, of breathing in on a count of 4 or multiples of 4, holding for 16 and breathing out 8, and then in 4, holding 16 and out 8. So these types of pranayama also he taught, and he taught what is sometimes popularly called in English squared breathing, where you breathe in, say 4, you hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold out for 4, then breathe in 4, hold for 4, breathe out 4, hold out for 4, etc. So you do the puraka, kumbhaka, rechaka, kumbhaka, puraka, kumbhaka, rechaka, kumbhaka. That is, you hold the breath out, or you hold the breath out also, as well as holding the breath within. So all of these different breathing exercises Swamiji taught. I'll come in a moment before I conclude to explain why. But first, I want to give you an idea of Swamiji's teaching. He also taught the bandhas. At least he taught 2 of the bandhas which are used with pranayama. And I wouldn't be surprised if he taught the 3rd also, because there are many classes on pranayama that we don't have. But the 2 bandhas he did teach were the Jalandhara bandha, where you, after breathing in, you put the head down like so, and the Uddiyana bandha, where you force the air out and you hold the abdomen in, with the abdomen pressed against the spine, as it were. The third classic bandha of pranayama, the mula bandha, that I haven't found evidence that he taught it, but perhaps he did. Again, because we only have a partial record of his teachings on pranayama. But as you'll see, he certainly knew all of the bandhas, etc. Swamiji also gave a great deal of teaching and a great deal of attention in his teachings on pranayama to the kundalini. He would tell his students to visualize the kundalini, the Ida and the Pingala, the moon current on the left and the sun current on the right, which is said to be what hatha means. Of course, there are 2 or 3 different derivations of hatha, one meaning sudden or violent, and another meaning the sun, ha, and moon, ta, yoga, the union of the ha and the ta currents, the Pingala and the Ida in that formulation, unifying them until the Kundalini goes up the Sushumna. So Swamiji taught his students to visualize the Ida and the Pingala, to visualize the triangle at the base of the spine, and the coiled serpent within the base of the spine. Now, Swamiji didn't go into elaborate descriptions of lotuses and letters and all of that. He gave a very simple, easy to do exercise of visualizing the Muladhara at the base of the spine, the triangle, the serpent power coiled up within it. And then he told his students that when you breathe in, instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, use your mantra. Now he said you should use your Ishta mantra, which shows that Swamiji had initiated the people in his class. He had given them an Ishta mantra. This was in New York. Actually, this is in the 6 Lessons on Raja Yoga, given in 1894, December 1894 in Boston, at actually Cambridge, at the house of Mrs. Sarah Bull, Holly Bull. So at that time, he had the people in his class were initiated, because he said, the first instruction was to use Om. But then the next day, when he gave the next lesson, he said, instead of Om, use your Ishta mantra, and told them, as you breathe in and breathe out during the Puraka and the Rechaka, count with your Ishta bija, not with Om. But then during Kumbhaka, think that you are sending energy down and striking the head of the serpent with the bija Hum, 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 awakening the serpent power. So the pranayama instructions that Swamiji gave to his students in America and elsewhere were not lacking in detail. He gave the most traditional types of pranayama exercises, the visualization of the kundalini, the use of mantra, and the use of at least 2, if not 3, of the bandhas during pranayama. So he was quite, or gave quite extensive lessons on pranayama to his disciples. So I want to ask why he gave so much attention to pranayama when teaching in the West. Not that he wouldn't have given that in the East, but he was concerned with other things in the East, in India, that is. And in the West, he saw that what people needed was a way to calm down. People were hyperactive, were addicted to activity, addicted to too much thinking and too much doing. And they needed some physical help in order to bring the body and the mind into harmony. So Swamiji says that in pranayama, we come through pranayama first to the control of the lungs, not prana, as Swamiji explains clearly. Prana does not mean breathing. Breathing is controlled by prana, but through the practice of pranayama, we get control first of the motion of the lungs. Through that, we get some control over the heart, because of the connection, intimate connection between the lungs, oxygenation of blood, and the heart. Through the heart, we get control of the circulatory system. And this is laid out by Swamiji. We get control over the circulatory system. Through the circulatory system, we get control of the brain. Through the brain, we get control of the mind. And through the mind, we get control of everything. So Swamiji says that that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get control of the prana through controlling the motion of the lungs. Why the lungs? He explains it. Because the lungs are one of the most vital, or the breathing process, I should say, is one of the most vital processes that we have. The heart is more vital, but it's hard to get control of the heart because we don't normally have conscious control over it. But breathing is an extremely vital function, which we have conscious control over when we want to, and when we don't want to, it goes on automatically, unconsciously, it continues, fortunately for us. Otherwise, we die when we fall asleep or when we forget to breathe. But because the breathing is one place in our system, which is extremely vital, and which is both, can be both conscious and unconscious, we can get control of the whole nervous system. The conscious part of the nervous system and the autonomic part of the nervous system. We can get control of all of it. And through controlling the lungs and the nerves which control the lungs, we get control of these other systems leading up to control of the mind. And there we begin to get control of prana, because prana is that which mediates between the body and mind, and also which the mind is the body and mind both are manifestations of prana. But when we get control of the mind, we become controllers of prana itself. He tells the story in different places of the minister who was imprisoned in a tower. And so his wife came to the base of the tower and asked if she could help him. And he said, yes, bring me a beetle, an insect, a beetle, a little bit of honey, a fine silk thread, a piece of thicker twine, and a rope. And so she brought everything at late at night when no one would see her or hear her. And he said, now asked her to get them up to him. And he said, put a drop of honey on the antennae of the beetle, and then to its leg, tie the silken thread, and then point it going upwards to my place in the tower. And so the beetle starts climbing up the tower, trying to get to the honey, which is on its head, and carrying the silk thread upward. And then she ties the twine to the silk thread. And so the twine begins to go up. And then by the time the beetle gets to the top of the tower, where her husband is, she ties the twine to the rope. And then he's able to pull up through the silk thread, the twine, and then the rope. And that way he can escape from the tower. So Swamiji says that's what we're doing in pranayama. We're taking the help of the lungs in order to get control of the circulatory system, taking advantage of the circulatory system in order to get control of the brain. And getting control of the brain, we become controllers of the mind and the prana. So that is basically what he says about pranayama, about what we are trying to do. So let me read a short passage here before I close. What electricity is, no one knows, but so far as it is known, it is a sort of motion. And that's true now. Bertrand Russell himself said no one knows what electricity is, and it's true even now. There are various other motions in the universe. What is the difference between them and electricity? Suppose this table moves, that the molecules which compose this table are moving in different directions. Now, as we know now, it's not that the molecules move, but their orientation changes, their electrical orientation changes, as we know now. Suppose this table moves, that the molecules which compose this table are moving in different directions. If they are all made to move in the same direction, that is, if they're all made to orient in the same direction, it will be through electricity. Electric motion makes the molecules of a body move in the same direction. If all the air molecules in the room are made to move in the same direction, it will make a gigantic battery of electricity in the room. Another point from physiology, we must remember that the center which regulates the respiratory system, the breathing system, has a sort of controlling action over the system of nerve currents. So the reason why we practice pranayama is to get control over the currents within the body and to make them aligned. What happens, and now my time is up, so I'll just be very brief now. What happens when we do that? Our minds right now are distracted, all kinds of thoughts come into the mind, random thoughts, one thought after another. And that's because of the random firing of prana, the random movement of prana within the body. But when the prana is charged, as it were, with the rhythm of rhythmical breathing and the kumbhaka and everything, it becomes as if electrified. The nerve currents within the body become electrified, and everything moves in the same direction. Then the mind stops, because the mind, again, was firing because of the random flow of prana. And when the prana becomes still or regulated, then the mind stops, and we gain, as Swamiji explains, tremendous control of the will. Those who have been in a
Oh, you had to unmute, Swami. You are muted. You are muted. You are muted. Better. You are muted. Please unmute.
Mute all first.
Mute all कर देंगे. Mute all करते करेंगे. Swami, please unmute. Please unmute. You are muted now.
Oh, sorry. How long was that muted?
Oh, for a few seconds. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how that happened.
Repeat the last portion again if you like.
What is that, Swamiji?
The last portion you can repeat again if you like.
Yes, okay. So Swamiji says that through pranayama, we get control over the currents of the nadis, the currents of the channels of prana, and the prana begins to flow smoothly. And when that happens, it becomes as if an electric charge has charged the prana itself. In fact, Swamiji says that what electricity is, no one knows. But so far as it is known, it is a sort of motion. There are various other motions in the universe. What is the difference between them and electricity? Suppose this table moves, that the molecules which compose this table are moving in different directions. If they are all made to move in the same direction, it will be through electricity. Now, when he says that the molecules move, of course, now we know from 20th century science that the molecules don't move, but they orient themselves through the power of an electric charge. They change their electrical orientation. Electric motion makes the molecules of a body move in the same direction, that is, orient in the same direction. If all the air molecules in a room are made to move in the same direction, it will make a gigantic battery of electricity of the room. So Again, that's what happens through pranayama. The body becomes a tremendous battery of energy because the prana is made to flow rhythmically and in a particular orientation, as if the body is charged with electricity. When Sri Ramakrishna would be in ecstasy, the hair on his head and his body would stand on end, as if he were electrified. Or sometimes, if we're in a special puja, especially around the altar where the deity is, some of you may have experienced in a special puja when there's a special atmosphere, the whole atmosphere becomes charged, as it were, with electricity, and one feels the hair in one's body standing on end. So that's what happens with the control of the prana. The body becomes, as it were, a dynamo of energy, and as Swamiji explains, a dynamo of tremendous willpower. So now let me come to the conclusion and read a short passage from Swamiji. This is actually from the conversation or the reminiscences of Sri Priyanath Sinha, who as a young man went to Bellarmut to talk to the Swami and recorded part of the conversation. He says, after replying to a few questions, Swamiji, Swami Vivekananda of course, began to speak about pranayama. First of all, he explained through modern science the origin of matter from the mind. So again, what we saw before. He explained the origin of matter from the mind, how out of mind come prana and akasha. And then he went on to show what pranayama is. Previously, all three of us, the friends with Priyanath Sinha, all three of us had carefully read his book, Raja Yoga. But from what he said that day about pranayama, it seemed to me that very little of his knowledge had been recorded in that book, Raja Yoga. His conversation on pranayama went on from 3:30 till 7:30 in the evening. He talked about pranayama for 4 hours continuously. 4 hours he spoke about pranayama to these young men. So as he says, that very little of that knowledge was contained in the book Raja Yoga. So again, I'll conclude by saying that Swamiji gave great importance to the idea of prana in trying to relate Vedantic cosmology to modern science, and he gave great importance to the practice of pranayama as a means to control the mind and body. And that he gave very specific and detailed instructions to his disciples about the practice of pranayama. So with that, I will conclude. And very happy to see Swami Atmarupananda ji, and my salutations, and thanks for this invitation to this important seminar that you're having.
A couple of questions.
Yes.
If anybody has some questions, please. You can put it in the chat or you can speak.
Now, what is that, Swamiji?
Somebody can put it in the chat box, or they can chat directly also, virtually. So if anybody has a question, please go ahead for a few minutes. You have made it so clear that nobody has a question.
Let's hope that's the reason. So good, Swamiji. So good to see you, and very glad to be able to spend a little bit of time in the company of all of you.
So we'll close now.
So I will say Hari Om, and wish you all a good day.
Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Order. Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji. Thank you all very much.